Welcome to the sixth and last in a short series of webinars presented by Bold Climate Action in partnership with Irish Doctors for the Environment under the heading of Healthy Ageing, Healthy Planet. My name is Crichton. I'm from Bold, as is Christine Magee, who will be facilitating your questions and comments later. We'll be joined soon by Orlagh Gaynor, who is from Irish Doctors for the Environment. She will be presenting this webinar, which is entitled Sustainable Diets for You for the Planet. This webinar was prepared for us today by Dr. Orlagh Gaynor, who is a registrar in gastrointestinal medicine. If you've been following this series of webinars, you will know that Bold is a group for the older citizen who is concerned about the climate crisis and climate injustice. We've been working in a variety of areas which fit with those concerns since Bold came into being nearly 4 years ago. We've taken part in real-time actions such as the Climate March in November, and I was on an online meeting last night where we with Stop Climate Chaos, where that was very much being remembered as a big success, not entirely due to Bold, of course. And we want older people to be visibly engaged with environmental issues. As energy poverty is a common concern, we've also worked to enable older people's access to retrofitting and their entitlement to warmer homes. We have developed or are developing relationships with other groups serving older people, such as Age Friendly Ireland, Men and Women's Sheds, Age Action and Age in Opportunity. We also connect with feminist communities for climate justice, climate law and mediation, and the National Women's Council. And of course, we are very pleased to be partnered with Irish Doctors for the Environment in presenting this series on health. Together, we want to look at the health issues commonly affecting older people in the context of environmental sources and solutions. I'll now pass over to Orlagh, who, as well as being a physiotherapist, is Operations Manager for Irish Doctors for the Environment. Thank you. Over to you, Orlagh.
Hi everybody, it's wonderful to have you all here today. Thank you all so much for coming, and as always, thank you so much to Bold and Friends of the Earth for facilitating this meeting and just making it happen. My name is Orlagh Gaynor. As Rod very kindly introduced me, I'm the Operations Officer for Irish Doctors for the Environment, and I will be presenting this webinar today on sustainable diets, prepared by my colleague Dr. Orlagh Gaynor. I myself, like Rod has mentioned, I'm a physiotherapist, and I've just finished my a master's in planetary health, where there was a huge focus as well on sustainable diets and agri-food systems. So I'm really delighted to bring some of that knowledge to the table as well. So Orlagh and I put our heads together, and she came with her GI knowledge and I came with the agri-food knowledge and sustainable diets. And hopefully there's so many slides that I'm going to be like, we'll go through them in quickly enough, but not in a way that I hope is overwhelming. And there'll be time at the end for a little bit of a breakout room where we come up with some solutions for our own communities, and also time for questions at the end. So please do, you can pop them into the chat during the webinar, and Christine will be collecting them and she'll be facilitating the Q&A at the end. But sustainable diets has been a huge focus of Irish Doctors for the Environment since its inception, really. And who we are in IDE, we are a voluntary NGO who engage in we're a registered charity consisting of healthcare professionals and students in Ireland who aim to create awareness, interest and implement action around environment and health and the impact it has on our own patients' health. We work alongside other NGOs such as Bold and Friends of the Earth, other environmentalists, scientists and other organisations to educate and promote healthcare as a key issue in climate change. So that's who we are, and without further ado, I think we might jump right into it. Are there any more, if we introduce everybody? Rod, I think Christine, fantastic. So I'm going to share my screen, jump into the info bit. Now, can we all see that okay? Fantastic. Let's jump into it then. So, sustainable diets and agri-food systems, prepared by Dr. Orlagh Gaynor and presented by yours truly. And I hope I do Orlagh did the vast majority of the prep on the slide, so I hope I do her justice. But this is our agenda for today. We're just going to go through why sustainable diets matter, the environmental impact of our food systems, characteristics of a sustainable diet, some dietary patterns that are considered more sustainable, and just addressing the discussion around animal sourced foods, a little bit on food waste, a little bit on choosing local and seasonal, the health benefits, some of the challenges, criticisms and discourse, and ultimately what can individuals do. So what do we mean by sustainable diets? So really, when we talk about sustainable diets, we are talking about the connection between food, what we put into our bodies, our own health, and also the impact that those choices have on the environment. So the Food and Agriculture Organization under the United Nations state that diets with low environmental impacts that contribute to food and nutrition security and healthy lives. That's how they would define a sustainable diet. So why do they matter? There are multiple co-benefits to sustainable diets. Sustainable diets ultimately improve health and lowering the risk of chronic conditions such as heart disease, respiratory illness, obesity, diabetes. We'll jump into a lot of this later on. They also reduce the environmental impact, so our environmental footprint on the earth. And it's sustainable diet through choosing choosing sustainably sourced foods will help conserve our natural resources, because our current agri-food systems can be very resource intensive and really can be really polluting if we don't treat it with a lot of thought and respect. As well as that, sustainable diets will protect biodiversity. It also involves reducing food waste and going upstream, supporting local economies and communities. So there are so many facets to what we actually mean by a sustainable diet. It's not merely about reducing carbon emissions, but also finding that balance of what's good for our bodies and also what's good for the planet. So the health impact of climate change in general. So why are we connecting our agri-food system with climate change and health? So agriculture in Ireland, as stated by the EPA, agriculture in Ireland accounts for 38% of our national greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a huge duty. We're the country in the EU with the second highest GDP and also the second highest greenhouse gas emissions, and that we have a moral obligation really to mitigate that. And from an equity point of view, this is really grossly unfair, because we can see here the links, the kind of interconnectedness of how climate change will impact human health, not just by we might all be aware of certain like fertilizer use impacting polluting our rivers. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but just those greenhouse gases and how the cascading of effects that has on the planet and then ultimately on our health. So you can see that there, and you will have access to this to these slides later on. So 30% of global greenhouse gases come from food systems, driven by deforestation, biodiversity loss, and really water intensive. You have this double burden of, and it's quite paradoxical as well, where you have malnutrition in some of the lower income households and countries, also coexisting with obesity as well, and obesity and type 2 diabetes endemic. So there's something really gone awry here with our agri-food systems. The unsustainable farming and diets, they really harm both people and planet, whereas sustainable diets are more plant-based, really involve a lot more plant-based foods with less red and processed meat. There are some solutions such as agroecology and regenerative farming to protect soil, water and biodiversity. I'm not sure if we're aware of this, but 30% of food produced worldwide is actually lost or wasted. So we are overproducing, and yet we still have undernutrition, and we're causing all this this pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. There are so many economic and policy solutions or economic and policy reforms that we could make that from an upstream governance level we're simply not. So it's really about harnessing those and convincing both national and international governments that this is the way to go. We ultimately need to protect biodiversity, climate, our water and soil quality, which will then reduce disease burden and healthcare costs. So the environmental impact of our food systems, really this comes from livestock production, or kind of hosting livestock, our fertilizer use and food processing, as well as the land use and deforestation. So forests act as carbon sinks. When we cause deforestation, when we chop down trees, that causes a carbon emission as well, a huge carbon bomb into the atmosphere, and we lose that carbon absorption as well. So really the overwhelming evidence points to that land being cleared for not just livestock but grain for livestock. I know a few years back there was a little bit of debate around soy. Really, soy is overwhelmingly used for livestock feed. So when you think of all the energy input going into livestock and what that really feeds at the end, rather than those grains going to feed people individually, that's it's very little, a lot of input for very little output, and in terms of calorie and feeding. So 70% of global freshwater is used for our food systems. It causes so much biodiversity loss and soil degradation just from pesticide use, chemical fertilizers, intensive farming, from just not letting fields rest, water and air pollution from the fertilizers and pesticides, as we've mentioned, and that really high percentage of food waste as well. So making food systems more sustainable is one of the most important ways to address climate change, conserve our natural resources, protect biodiversity, and ensure our long-term food security as well. So if we increase consumption of our plant-based foods, we can improve. We can also improve farming practices. We can reduce food loss and waste. We can conserve and protect forests and natural ecosystems. We can use water and fertilizers and energy far more efficiently, and we can tie that together to support local and seasonal food production where possible. So there's so many solutions we can take, and certainly in Ireland we are not harnessing this enough. We are a very fertile country, and ultimately we are overstocked. We use most of this for livestock production rather than fresh produce production or grain production. So, and I will jump into that a little bit later. Fantastic. So what does a sustainable diet actually look like? It can look like a lot of things actually, but really it's nutritionally adequate, it's environmentally friendly, it's also economically affordable, it's culturally acceptable and accessible to consumers, particularly in terms of price and being able to get it. So we'll jump into that now. So the key thing here is something called the Planetary Health Diet. This was an idea. So it was formed by the Eat Lancet Foundation, so the Lancet Medical Journal, combined with the EAT Forum, and this is what a plate of what a sample plate of the planetary health diet might look like, just proportion wise. So we can see there it is primarily based in a lot of fresh, like our fresh produce, our fruit and vegetables. There's some space for whole grains as well, then that's the next biggest portion. Some unsaturated plant oils. Our plant-sourced protein is very good as well. You might notice that there is room for dairy foods and animal-sourced protein, so such as your meats, your dairies, your cheeses, but they're very, very small, in very, very small amounts. And even historically, that is what the proportions we would have had. Like, meat was a special occasion going back centuries, but on the flip side of that, we didn't have the variety available to us now, whereas now we do have lots of nutritional variety. We can definitely afford, for the most part, to adopt something like this. The planetary health diet, it doesn't follow a strict rule. It is flexible, and this is the one that's generally it's aimed at the general population that are otherwise healthy. This doesn't account for special conditions such as the first one that comes to mind is like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or people on a specific diet. This is just aimed at the otherwise healthy population who don't need dietary restrictions for medical reasons. So it was developed by the Eat Lancet Commission in 2019. It was designed to improve both health and environmental sustainability. It's a focus mainly on plant-based eating, and really the goal is to feed this growing global population while protecting Earth's natural resources. And justice and access to food is a huge underlying theme of this, in the sense that it's flexible and it's not totally prescriptive. It's not a diet plan, so it's adapted. It can be adapted to local contexts. You can see as we kind of went through it's mainly fruit and veg, legume, nuts and seeds focused, limited amounts of red meat, poultry and fish and dairy, and very low processed foods. So it is, as we've said, we've got their health benefits and the environmental benefits by lowering greenhouse gases, using less land and water, helping preserve biodiversity, and supporting sustainable food systems. So some tips on how to follow it: filling half your plate with fruit and veg, replace some meat meals with beans or lentils. There are far other plant-based protein sources as well, and we can address that a little as well. Choosing whole grains over refined grains, reducing food waste, and buying seasonal and locally grown where possible. So small changes in what we can eat can really improve our health while helping protect the planet for future generations. So what might a planetary health diet look like, or what do other sustainable diets look like? So the plant-forward diets is the more accessible term, rather than saying completely plant-based or vegan. A lot of controversy. I remember I was vegan over lockdown, like very strictly vegan for about 4 or 5 months, and then, but vegan is culture. I won't go off on a tangent too much, but some people will assume that you live a very strict lifestyle on veganism, and other vegans can also expect you to do so, and it can be a little bit nuts. Sometimes there's a very loud minority which have certain expectations. So plant-based is a nice one which allows you that flexibility. But the Mediterranean diet, a vegetarian diet, or a flexitarian diet is they're all much more sustainable diets. They're based on the traditional eating patterns of countries around the Mediterranean Sea, so huge amounts of fruit and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts, olive oil. If you have ever gone down below them, like towards like Spain, Italy, the south of France, they're very particular about the olive oil that they use, the extra virgin olive oil, and they're right to be so. They love their just moderate amounts of fish and seafood, and very limited red meat and processed foods. I remember my French student when I was 15 saying to me, you eat a lot of red meat here. And I was like, oh, do we? Okay. So the culture difference is it can be very different. But you can see that's how the food pyramid looks a little bit more like in the Mediterranean diet. You still have a little bit of room for meats and sweets, but they're a rarity for special occasions or for just treating yourself rather than a staple in the diet. The really heavy emphasis on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and on a basis of an active lifestyle and regular hydration. So the vegetarian diet excludes meat, poultry and fish while emphasising a variety of plant-based foods. Vegetarian, there's like kind of subtypes of vegetarian. There's like, some people will include pescatarian, where you eat fish but not meat. There's like ovitarian? There's something where you like will include eggs and some vegetarians won't include eggs. It's all this different people will kind of adapt this slightly to their own preferences, whether it's medical or just personal preference. And the flexitarian diet is kind of like vegetarianism, but it's mostly plant-based eating, but allowing for occasional consumption of meat, poultry and fish, and really just far more plant-based focus rather than eliminating animal products completely. It's a very practical way of improving both your personal health and sustainability by just making plant-based foods the foundation of most of your meals. This is what as a little pathway to a flexible diet might look like. Just by starting small, just keeping meat in your meals but just using smaller portions, replacing calories with fresh vegetables, replacing then the meats with plant-based proteins, then having one meal a week that's entirely vegetarian or vegan. Then on the weekends you could keep the new diet up, and just for the weekends, and then just keeping it up as much as you feel able for, and then allowing for that flexibility when the occasion arises. On a personal note, I mentioned I was vegan for like a large portion of 2020. I am now, when I lived in Spain, I moved back from Spain last year after 3 years. I was vegetarian and then became more flexi-pescatarian, and now I am very flexitarian. I also have a peanut and kiwi allergy, and I don't like making a fuss out of things. It's very stressful. So I'm like, do you know what? If there's meat there and if it's the only option, I'll eat it. Whereas if not, I will. My preference is to eat vegan or vegetarian once I know what's in it. So it's ultimately about not doing it. We don't have to do perfect plant-based, wholly plant-based foods. It's better for the population to be doing something, to be making the best effort they can, rather than a small percentage of like fully vegans is the bottom line. So really important to touch on UPFs, ultra-processed foods. They're industrially manufactured foods that are made mostly or entirely from ingredients extracted from foods, and they're chemically modified substances with little or no whole food remaining. Now, Orlagh's put in here 30 to 50% of Irish diets consisting of UPFs. There's another study, and I think I have it cited later on, where it would suggest that 49% of Irish shopping is UPF dependent. And there's a little map where you can see how that looks all around Europe. Some of those UPF examples are sugary breakfast cereals, soft drinks, instant noodles, chicken nuggets, processed meats, sweetened yogurts with additives, and commercially packaged bread made with emulsifiers and preservatives. And controversially, some meat, like your vegan sausage rolls, they're plant-based, but they're also UPF, So it's very possible to do plant-based diets in a very unhealthy way as well. So just to bear that in mind as well. The environmental impact of UPFs: higher greenhouse gases, excessive packaging, very energy intensive manufacturing, reliance on these big commodity crops. There's just so much processing in them. They take up a lot of land, and really long supply chains, like that energy input versus what you get in your calorie output is just really not worth it. And we really need to reduce the reliance on UPFs while choosing more whole, minimally processed plant foods. Higher UPF intake is associated with an increased risk of early onset colorectal adenomas, so kind of like those precancerous polyps. So they're really not good for your health. The fact that we are so reliant on them is really a public health concern. Animal source foods. So, opening this can of worms. Some of the challenges around this, and I've mentioned this before. Livestock production contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from ruminants. Basically, larger the animal, the more polluting it is. It kind of goes from cow down to cow, sheep, pigs. Pork is a huge one. Chicken and those leaner meats, those from the smaller, like from your poultry, are less polluting. However, they still carry quite a significant carbon footprint. It really requires a lot of land and water resources, and I talked about that input versus output. In Ireland, we are far too overstocked. I don't know if you're aware of the environmental author and journalist John Gibbons. He talks about this a lot in his recent fantastic book. He'll love me for giving it a shout out. We are grossly overstocked. We export 90% of our meat and dairy products to the detriment of our land and our water. So it's quite an emergency in Ireland that we're burying our heads in the sand over. The benefits of our animal source foods, however, they are very high quality protein, and they contain very important nutrients such as B12, iron, zinc, and calcium. If the grazing system is managed properly, it can support soil health, carbon storage, and biodiversity, and livestock can utilise land unsuitable for crop production and convert grass into nutrient-dense food. So it can be done properly, but in the right amount, and in the right stockage per hectare of land as well. There's many concerns about this, many kind of parameters to kind of bear in mind that deem whether it's sustainable or not. So, environmental impact will depend on the type of animal, like we mentioned, but we do need a shift towards a more moderate consumption and choosing sustainably produced animal foods. We certainly need an increase in plant-based foods and to balance human health and environmental sustainability. Food waste. Now, food waste is approximately 1/3 of, like we said, 1/3 of food worldwide. There's wasted water, wasted energy, and methane. Methane when food goes to landfill rather than being put into compost. It's a far more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Now, greenhouse gases are often measured in terms of like carbon dioxide equivalents. However, the methane gas, which is CH4, traps heat much more effectively, which is a bad thing, than carbon dioxide. So the more we're allowing methane to enter the atmosphere, the more we are contributing to that global heating. So it's really a lose-lose situation. We cannot afford to be wasting food the way we are. There are so many individual solutions with meal planning, buying only what we need, better storage, composting food scraps as much as we can, and also like the redistribution programs on a community level, like our food banks and local composting as well. And then, so choosing locally seasonal and sustainable food. So food grown or produced in Ireland would be our local foods. Our seasonal food would be the foods that are naturally harvested and naturally grow at certain times of the year, so changing what we eat according to the seasons. Food produced in ways that really support the environment, really, like choosing those plant-based options. Now the thing about it is, now before I get to life in Spain, is that in Ireland we have not. We simply don't have enough fresh produce growers. There's a wonderful organisation called Talamh Bio. They are trying to create their grassroots network of organic farmers, trying to kind of create connections between the different organic farmers. However, there's very few supports at government level. All the subsidies go towards really meat and dairy. Not saying there's no subsidies available, but there's no incentive for farmers at the minute in Ireland to go to organic agroecological farming for fresh produce. We used to have 400 fresh produce growers in Ireland going back to the 90s. That number has now reduced to about 59. So I'm going to tell you a little story of when I was living in Spain. This is what my life looked like a little bit. It was about 2 weeks ago. This picture on the left, it was really hot, and I was like, oh my god, I really want my tomate. In Spain, you take the little plate there, and you grind your tomato on it, and you make like little tomato juice out of it, and you put it on bread. You put a little sprinkle of salt on, and you get your manchego cheese. And obviously the organic extra virgin olive oil. The extra virgin is non-negotiable. They will they'll tell you what to be at. And I made gazpacho as well. And I was just thinking, I went to go look for tomatoes, because I remember in Spain, I told my colleagues, it was September. I said, I'm going to make gazpacho. And they're like, it's September. There's not any good tomatoes. And I was like, does it matter? Believe me, it matters. Well, it matters. It's just that relationship that Spain had with their food and their produce. So every town, every village was known as a fruteria, like a greengrocer's, and you could get such amazing food, like fresh food grown. You knew where it was coming from, and if you didn't know, the seller would know, and you knew what was in season. Even when I taught English, my children knew what was like in season, and you just had this wonderful close relationship. But I went to go buy tomatoes in Ireland. I could not find Irish tomatoes. There were 5 growers. I eventually went to Tesco and I happened across some Irish tomatoes, and they were delicious. But only 5 tomatoes, 5 producers of tomatoes currently in Ireland. It's pretty dire. This was one of the picture of one of my food shops in Spain. I want you to chuck into the chat now. If you can type into the chat, how much do you think it cost? Guess how much you think that fruit shop cost? It wasn't 5. The answer was €14.20. Right? The thing is, fresh fruit. I lived in a very low income area initially, and my local fruteria was there, and everybody was on their pension, on quite for the cost of living. It was, wasn't great, but they all had access to fresh fruit and veg. Everybody did, and it was just what was the done thing. So you look at Spain here on this wee map, and these were the figures I was citing earlier from the Public Health Nutrition Institute. So you can see how Spain, only 20% of their shopping trolley is UPFs, whereas in Ireland, apologies, I miscited the figure, it's 45.9%. So it's a huge difference. You can see how it is in Southern Europe versus Northern Europe. I wish there was data in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands are doing fantastic work in growing fresh produce, but just despite having a similar kind of climate, do you know? Okay, let me see. Sorry. Take out of that. Yeah. So, what does eating seasonally in Ireland look like when you can get it? And in theory, if we had the growers, in spring, you'd have your rhubarb, your lettuce, your spring onions. You'd have lots of berries in the summer. We've got our apples, carrots, and potatoes in autumn, and in winter, it'd be a lot of cabbage leeks, turnips. And this would just be there'd be less reliance on imports and much better taste and nutritional value as well. Ireland is incredibly food insecure because we don't have that. When the Strait of Hormuz closed, we were at huge risk, and only for we're quite a rich country, we could source our food elsewhere. We would notice the variety reducing in our supermarkets. About 1/3 of our fresh produce that we import, we could actually grow here. Do you know, we can grow onions, and there's so much we can grow here that we don't need to be importing. And then, and again, even farmers are finding it so hard to adjust with the changing climate and changing temperatures that we may find that evolving in years to come. Even in Britain, they're growing. There's actually a wine grower down the road from me, which is really weird. I haven't investigated that much, but it shows you the temperatures that are rising, that our agri-food system could actually look very different in decades to come. But I won't. I could go on a big tangent with this. I'll try to keep better to time. But yeah, but we do, where possible, support local and sustainable food in Ireland. If we can, choosing farmers markets or local shops. And there's where the equity issue comes in. We can't. I was advised a patient the other day on an organic farm that's about 30 kilometres away. It's in Balbriggan. It's, not everyone can afford to do that. I'm thinking of the lowest income households. We should have this accessibility for everybody. We can reduce the food miles by choosing Irish grown over imported alternatives. And then the sustainable practices in Ireland would be if we implemented far more regenerative, agroecological farming, and reducing the packaging of food waste. So the carbon footprint and food print really depends on the full life cycle and not just distance. We have to consider what is being produced, how it's being produced, and when it's being produced, and how it is transported. So, another little debate. Is it better? What's better for the environment? Choosing our organic steak grown in Kerry, or importing an avocado from Mexico? Importing avocados from Mexico. What do you think? Now, presuming that you eat steak or beef pretty regularly, and you're always choosing it from Ireland. Oh, sorry. Now, so you're going to be surprised. Is actually the avocados are actually more sustainable because they're being imported with something else. Now, okay, avocados perhaps is a slightly bad example. They're very water intensive, but the beef is so carbon intensive. And if that's a regular thing in somebody's diet, it is. The impact that has on greenhouse gases is huge, and far more than somebody who would regularly eat avocados imported from Mexico, because they're coming in on a very large ship that will share those transport emissions with lots and lots of other produce. It's a really good point. I'll touch back on. Oh God, I've opened up a can of worms now. I knew I'd open up cans of worms in this, by the way, but I'll come back to it. But it's about you sharing those transport emissions. So if I import some produce from another country, it's coming in on a big ship with lots of other things, and that it's far less energy intensive in terms of input to output. Because I don't have to do anything else except slice open the avocado and put it on my plate. Whereas while the avocados are water intensive, I will say that they take an awful lot of water, but they're basically just farm transport table, and even though it's a long distance, it is still a better regular choice. I'm not saying don't buy meat from Kerry. Meat from Kerry's fantastic, but it's still very carbon intensive to be having on such a regular basis. So it's really weighing up those options, and it can be very, very difficult to do that. But the overwhelming evidence suggests that plant-based, not even suggest, but the overwhelming evidence that indicate plant-based diets, no matter where the stuff is coming from, are still more sustainable than choosing regular, very frequent meat options sourced locally. And ironically, the butchers are fantastic for sourcing local, like veg and local products as well. So it is a balancing act, and we won't get it perfect every time, do you know? So health benefits. I'll try to fly through this. I'm so sorry. I tried to keep the time, but I'm diabolical. So plant-based diets, lower cardiovascular disease risk, lower obesity rates, better metabolic health overall. So like talking about your diabetes, in terms of like diabetes risk, your risk of kind of developing chronic conditions like thyroid illness, also your gut health as well for your higher intake of fiber and micronutrients. Your gut health, your gut microbiome gets benefits from eating whole foods like fiber and your vitamins from fresh fruit and veg. And our gut microbiome forms a lot of our hormone system, actually. About 70% of your serotonin, so the hormone that makes you feel happy, is produced in the gut microbiome. And that also, each hormone has like an effect on each other. So one level of one hormone is will have an effect on another. So your cortisol will impact your estrogen, will impact your thyroid stimulating hormone. They're all in relation to each other. The hormone and endocrine system doesn't exist in isolation. Oh yeah, eating sustainable, and yet with dental limitations. So yeah, plant-based soft foods. If there are dental concerns, like so in our last webinar we talked about chewing and brushing teeth and dental hygiene. So choosing plant-based soft foods like our lentil soups, our hummus, our bean purees. There's a way to stew vegetables or using a blender if possible. Our oats and soft grains. There's lots and lots of soft protein options. Slow cooking can be a really nice way to prepare food without having to stand over an oven all day or something, and so that you can go and do something else or rest. Steaming and blending is another way as well. So there's loads of food preparation options. So challenges and criticisms. So I think we spoke a little. I've dealt with a few of these now before as I went off on my tangents, iteratively. But equity issues. Sustainability should not increase food security. It is unfair, it would be grossly unfair of me to stand up here on my soapbox and say, everyone should buy from organic markets and go to your Saturday market and go to your local organic farm. That's like, it's great. If you can do it, fantastic. Go for it if you can. But we know that not everybody can do this. It's expensive. It shouldn't be that way. Our economic system should be supporting this, that this is the norm. This has been the norm in Denmark and the Netherlands, where organic is just the standard, and about 80 to 90% of produce on the shelves is organically produced, with much more sustainable farming practices. And that's just the standard and the baseline. You needing to ensure adequate nutrient intake. It is very possible to do plant-based diets. If it's not varied enough, you risk a nutrient deficiency. So it's really important that if you're not sure what, you got to read up a little bit more on it, or follow some, like, there's really lovely recipe books out there. Just to ensure your adequate intake if you're not a fussy eater. And if you are a little bit particular about foods, just take it really slowly. We don't have to do this perfectly. There are some economic barriers around food affordability, like I mentioned, and also cultural barriers as well. There's a running joke in my family where I made a lentil curry, a dal. It's called a dal. I don't know if you might be into Asian cooking, but I made it, and my father, who loves his meat, he tried it and he goes, "Oh, Orla, that's lovely. Could do with a bit of chicken though," and it's like, Dals have never in India have never had any kind of meat in it, so it's like, okay, Dad, yeah, just you can tell the Indians that you want to put chicken into their traditional meal, but kind of breaking those cultural breaking down those cultural barriers a little bit and trying new things as well, because in Ireland we would have been, like, I mean, we only had potatoes really from the 1500s. And from colonization, we would have become so dependent on them and dependent on livestock as well. It doesn't need to be like that. And this false root in tradition that really was imposed upon us rather than, oh God, I'm going off on one of my tangents again. But it's breaking that down and trying new things, and finding a way to eat seasonally and plant-based as well, while maintaining those native plant produce as well. Sorry. Oh yeah, Breakout. There's actually a couple of slides at the end of this just to kind of round it off, so I'm going to come back to this slide 45, but some of our practical actions that we've kind of mentioned, and how can we create diets that nourish both people and planet. There's a little bit on the high protein diet debate. This big food tends to follow fashion. In the 90s it was all anti-fat, early 2000s was anti-sugar. Now it's all about the protein. We need to get on the protein. It is very important. It's very important to maintain muscle mass as we get older and prevent that muscle loss that, if you attended some of the previous webinars, I've spoken a bit about that natural muscle loss as we get older. We can stave it away by regular exercise and keeping up our protein as well, our diet, but especially protein. A lot of these are actually UPFs, so these like protein bars and protein cereals. So like choosing our more natural options, our lean meats. If we're choosing to, if we're choosing that minimal meat intake, using our yogurts or our eggs. Really that variety. With plant-based diets, it is about that variety of sources, so to get all those kind of amino acids in. So the amino acids are those foundational chains of proteins. So once you vary the diet with plant-based proteins as well as there's some small amounts of protein in vegetables as well. Once it's varied, you will be all right. You get your appropriate intake. And yeah, the benefits of higher protein are context dependent. Excess protein does not, so this is excess in excess of what you need, doesn't automatically improve health outcomes, and quality and food source matter far more than actual quantity. We talked about food security, longer supply chains, and loss of local agricultural knowledge and biodiversity. We talked a little bit about the organic produce as produced without pesticides, emphasising soil health, and that emphasising soil health and biodiversity, and for that EU organic certification. We know that organic produce has a lower frequency of pesticide residues, lower kind of cumulative exposure to synthetic pesticides, and however, lower exposure is not necessarily kind of a proven major health benefit in general. The evidence is mixed. However, there's a lot of pesticides that are increasingly being shown to increase risk of certain cancers, even herbicides as well, even like your weed killer, increasing risk of like Parkinson's and neurodegenerative disease. So the evidence is growing and mounting that we should be reducing our exposure regardless. It would be this the theoretically safer option. The agroecological approach is just that farming system that works with natural ecosystems. It's not just about yield and crop yield, it's about long-term natural resilience of the against climate and weather events, and that works with nature and works to promote biodiversity as well. There's a lot of resources on Agroecology EU, but it's just a farming method that there are some small farmers in Ireland that will adopt this kind of regenerative agroecological kind of concept. It's not only about what we avoid, but how we manage our farming systems. The messages are we're not going to be perfect at this. We can be flexible, and we won't beat ourselves up for choosing less sustainable options or having to choose less sustainable options. But these small changes really matter at scale. We need lots of people doing things imperfectly. And ideally, everybody doing something imperfectly, rather than the small minority doing things absolutely perfectly. Your diet quality and sustainability, they do overlap. And it's not just about what we eat, but it's how it's produced. And these local and seasonal choices, as well as that agroecological approach, can improve our natural biodiversity resilience as well as our food security. It's about better decisions within real-world constraints and not strict rules, is it in a nutshell. And I've talked a bit about who we are. That's ourselves. That's our gang. There's just a handful of us, but we've got over 240 members in Irish Doctors for the Environment. And sometimes it's like herding cats, but it is wonderful. We're like a family of very passionate health professionals who really care about bringing this message to as many people as we can. And that's just a small handful of us. So I hope there are many more resources. Actually, just before I logged in, I had some tech issues and I'd wanted to add in a few more here. But the Planetary Health Diet, you can contact ourselves. Planetary Health Alliance. There is also that John Gibbons book I mentioned. I'll pop it into the chat. It's called The Lie of the Land. There's a heavy agriculture focus on it. And also one of our members has a podcast called Your Heart and Your Health. Dr. Charles Byrne, he's got a very a good podcast on plant-based eating as well, and there's a lot of recipe resources on that as well. Apologies, I didn't get to pop those in, but I will link them in. And gang, I am going to stop talking. I do apologise for talking so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We can pop it into, apologies for going over time there.
Thank you so much, Orlagh. They're very comprehensive and lots of really interesting ideas there and great information. So our idea would be for us to be able to still break into small groups of maybe 4 or so, to be able to have a chance to share with each other some sort of ideas. There would be 2 sort of things we'd suggest that people might talk about. One would be maybe an individual action that they might be tempted into taking or changing. There we go. Identify a change you might make for yourself as a result of what we learned in this presentation. And then maybe to brainstorm some actions we can take collectively at a community or society level to support sustainable diets and food systems. There were lots of things that came to mind as Orlagh went through that presentation. So if we took 10 minutes in a room, it would be quite nice for people to meet each other and then come back and Orlagh will take questions then we'll wrap up. I hope everybody did enjoy the chance to meet other people on this group. It's always interesting and people have got lovely different perspectives. We have, I'd say, 10 minutes for questions. So if you have questions, will you pop them in the chat? I'm going to try and work off the ones that we have got there already and the ones I've picked up generally. So I think you can probably answer it quick enough, but there's an issue around that thing about clearing land. for
Mm.
avocados, for almonds, for soya. I would say it's interesting how often it is about, things that people are trying to move to instead of eating meat. But maybe you might be able to just tell us clearly about, that thing about those stories of clearing land for avocados, almonds, soya, etc.
Yeah, I knew I'd open up a can of worms with avocados, but it's a good debate. So a lot of where we source our avocados and almonds, they're very, like I said, they're very water intensive, and you're right, they are very land intensive. That's not to say that there are agroecological ways of producing them. There definitely are, which would mean that the land is used in a much more biodiversity friendly way, a much more like resource conservative way. The fact of the matter is that it's hard to source that, and you're trying to nearly choose between. It's kind of that trolley, that trolley dilemma. But the evidence would still suggest that, or not suggest, that the meat and the land cleared for meat production, as well as the actual carbon emissions of meat, is still far outweighs that of avocados transported from Mexico. It's not it's not saying we should be replacing meat with avocados because they're totally different nutritional profiles, but it's just it's a very common one in the discourse that I just would like to nail down and say, yeah, even though avocados, there's a lot of problems with them, there's a few ethical problems as well with certain drug cartels and having ownership and things like that. It's really hard to know where you're sourcing them from, but in terms of, I can just speak to the climate element of it, and yeah, the bottom line is that your avocados from abroad, all things considered, are still far less emitting than beef than beef from even from local sources.
That's great. Thank you. I'm sorry. That's and then the other thing around organic, and there's a couple of questions around buying organic. So you have the choice of buying organic, not Irish, or buying a local Irish product and not organic, and the difficulties around trying to balance those up. And I'm sure you can't answer that clearly, it's not very obvious. The other one is the thing of buying so much organic produce is in plastic. And the real, we know how bad plastic is. So the difficulty of buying loose, maybe you should buy loose rather than buying them wrapped in plastic. Are these things that are they're just too difficult to answer, but maybe you have a view to give us on those things?
Yeah, my own view is you can't do everything perfectly. Go with what, like, if it's local, organic, if it's Irish and it's organic, but it's wrapped in plastic, go for it. You're supporting local. It's a little bit of plastic. You're kind of, it's too. I still think that little outweigh, but if it was organic and coming from further afield and not wrapped in plastic, honestly, if I was met with that choice in Tesco, I'd probably nearly just go with what was accessible to me, like even price wise, like taking in that, and nearly I would just go with that because it's so hard to actually weigh this up. Please do. What I would say is just don't punish yourself for thinking you've chosen the wrong option. That's a very difficult one to decide, and don't. We're not going to do this perfectly, and just fight for better systems instead.
Yeah, good enough. Really, and don't don't angst. I thought one of the really big things I take away from what you said in this thing is it would be better if a big proportion of society would do it just good enough than a few people perfecting their behaviors. And I thought that's a really great sort of, for me anyway, a vision in my mind to just try and bring as many people along with you in this general move towards plant-forward diets and sustainable agriculture. Um, the equity issue, I'm taking it from our own group as well, but that it does come again and again of how can we get our government to support, with this local sustainable vegetables, agriculture, getting the vegetables cheaply to the people. How can we are there ways that we can get our government to overcome the equity issue of accessing fresh fruit and vegetables?
Yeah, Talamh Bio, I've put a link into the group chat. They have published a policy, like a local food policy, and really, I would encourage people to kind of get in contact, see what they can contribute to it, and see what they can, like, to promote it as well, and to encourage, like, my local. There's a flour producer who does organic flour near me. Hadn't a clue of Talamh Bio. They're all trying to network themselves. There's no government support there. And just getting your own, like, if you know somebody who's growing things organically, get them into the central grassroots network. Support them as much as you can. How do we lobby government? If I had that answer, I would be king. But it is translating the science into the policy, and starting that conversation start it among your own circles. Go to local media, larger media, your local councillor, and the more we talk about it, the more traction it gets. And that attracts media attention, and that attracts political attention, and it's that chain of what topics do that get traction. That is the short answer and very incomplete answer that I have.
Yeah, nice. As you say, just start where you can, and then also that the link to Talamh Bio is a lovely one. I think I'll have time for one last question. And somebody asked about how much veg protein should an older person actually eat. I don't know whether that's something that you can answer.
Yeah, so the dietary guidelines would recommend 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, per kg body weight. I'm going to just pop that into the chat.
Thank you.
So, and how do you calculate that? Now, whether it's vegetable protein or meat protein, it doesn't actually matter. That's just protein in general, like the compound protein. Try and just get it from a whole source and not your UPFs, like your protein bars, if you can avoid it. Try to get it, if you're eating like lentils and beans. Somebody did ask about like lentils and beans. There's no like you should eat 3 cups of beans a week or something like that. The fact is that they're very rich in protein. They're a very accessible way. When I was a vegan, I ate the beans and chickpeas most days, incorporated them in some shape or form, because they were just a very rich source of it. But just the variety, if you're going mostly plant-based, well, variety is important anyway, but especially important, don't just rely on one type of bean. Vary it up is what I would say. And you won't go too far in excess if you're going totally plant-based. It's the excess of supplementing where it gets a little bit more murky territory.
Great. Thank you very much, Orlagh. That's really great, really engaging, lively presentation, and thank you for answering all the questions so well. And the information in the chat box there is very useful, and we'll try and include that in the email that we send out. So I'm going to pass back now to Rod to conclude this, our final webinar in the series.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you to Orlagh for such a fascinating presentation. And also to both her and Dr. Orlagh in absentia for preparing this excellent webinar. So I want to say just a little bit, kind of rounding up on this webinar and also the series, and saying, well, we talk about consuming, and consuming food is essential, of course, if you're going to live. But the idea of consuming has become much more of a dominant idea in our culture. I'll return to that in a broader sense later. If we make our presence felt in the area of food as ethical and responsible consumers, we can influence what is being produced for us by big suppliers. And as we've heard, even better, support local producers and distributors to encourage sustainability and the domestic economy. As the global environment undergoes environmental change, not for the better, we need to be rethinking our whole attitude in order to drive change in how food is produced and consumed. A more egalitarian world where global hunger can be pushed back and hopefully eliminated must be our goal. So the Healthy Aging, Healthy Planet series has shown that there are areas of health in which we as individuals can take significant action to improve our own health and that of others with whom we connect. We have the videos of most of the topics we've covered in the series, and this one will be added to it. The topics, to remind you, have been active travel, the magic pill, connect with nature, care for yourself, plastics, micro and nanoplastics, the air we breathe, clean air, healthy lives, and dental health is whole health, and now sustainable diets, created with our invaluable collaborators, Irish Doctors for the Environment, whom I'd like to thank for their tireless work on the webinars, especially Orlagh, who has, as well as being integral to these webinars, has so many commitments. I don't know how she manages to be on top of everything. And the same can be said of Emma Jane at Friends of the Earth, who has been with us at Bold every step of the way. We'll be posting a link to a YouTube playlist so you can see these videos together in the one place. And we'd love to hear back from you on how you felt about the webinars, what you liked, what worked, what didn't, what we missed, what we might do going forward. A few words to sign off on the series. As I said, this society defines people by what and how they consume, and whether we like to think of ourselves primarily as consumers or not. To be a consumer is not just to consume food or products or services, of course. We consume ideas. And as we can be fed junk food, so we can commonly be expected to take in junk ideas. We're living in a time where ignorance, sometimes willful, is rife amongst those who lead us or have influence. Just as we can reject bad food, so we do not need to swallow bad ideas. As a group, we, that's to say all of us who are here today, all of us who have joined the webinars, others who know that the climate and biodiversity crises are real, we're smarter than that. We are better informed. And we know really what's right and true. And we know much of what needs to happen to get on the right track. What I think as a movement we sometimes lack is the will or self-belief to call out those who peddle nonsense as they seek to flim-flam us. The big boys in big oil, big tech, big pharma, big food, they have the power, the money and the megaphone. If we fall into line and behave as those controlling voices would have us do, we as individuals can be isolated and stunned into submission. Conversely, if we connect in communities, we build resistance and resilience, and in having numbers, we create empowerment for change. We hope Bold can empower older people, and indeed we hope people can continue to empower Bold to build on the work that's been done so far. So I think hopefully we'll see our email, our address appear, but it's bold.climate.action@gmail.com. That's bold.climate.action@gmail.com. And that will get you updates and hopefully a chance to get involved. So thank you to everyone who's participated today and indeed throughout all of the series. As a speaker and indeed as a contributor, as somebody who's just joined with us to hear and listen. So thank you so much for being part of this. And I'm signing off now. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you again so much to Bold, Friends of the Earth, for everyone who made this possible. And thank you so much if you've attended a few more. If this is your first time, please do stay in touch. And we'd love to hear from you. And we'll keep fighting the good fight.